I'm perfect. I'm perfectly imperfect, as we all are. And I don't actually need to change. I just need to accept and allow and go with the flow and trust my heart, what's in my heart, and tap into those cues, some of those body experiences and intuition, feelings of intuition and knowing.
Illuminance specializes in developing sensory processing sensitivity, a natural high sensory intelligence present in 30% of the population, co-creating with the power of humanity to consciously evolve towards balance. This session features trained high sensory coaches, facilitators and consultants who coach other high sensory people and partner with organizations globally. To contact them directly or to find out about our programs, please see the details in the description.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Illuminance channel. I'm Jane Elizabeth Aston and I'm a high sensory and spiritual connection coach. In today's video, we're going to be talking about how to live from our hearts rather than our heads as high sensory people. I'll introduce myself more fully in just a moment, but first I want to introduce 4 of my high sensory coach colleagues who are here with me today. So Karen, please do introduce yourself.
Thank you, Jane. I'm happy to be here as always. So I'm Karen Hunt and I'm a high sensory coach for high sensory mothers, and I champion and support them because I believe that when we actually focus on looking after ourselves first, then that's when the real magic can unfold in the world.
Thank you so much, Karen. Melina.
Thank you. My name's Melina. I support women, parents and caregivers manage the symptoms of burnout across all areas, including work life, personal life and family life. Through my guidance and experience, I lead my clients towards reconnection to clarity and to balanced, purposeful living.
Oh, wonderful, Melina. Trude.
Hello, everybody. So I'm Trude Sletteland and I am a high sensory coach and I run a creative centre in Bergen, Norway. And I think I've been trying my whole life, at least 15 years, to try and explain what that is. But it is a creative space where people, hearty people meet. And so we're not always that creative. We talk a lot because we're really sort of fundamentally we are aware of our needs to share and to feel into whatever goes on in the world and our hearts, and one way of sort of just being with our emotions is also being creative and trying to make whatever pops up, whatever we feel like, together, so that we're sort of doing something together. But it's sort of like mental wellness place, I think. So that's me.
Lovely, thank you, Trude. And finally, Kemal.
Thanks, Jane. My name's Kemal Shaheen, and I'm a high sensory facilitator. I have a background in international development and the not-for-profit sector, and I work with charities and their leadership team to help them align with their deeper purpose. And you can find me on LinkedIn.
Oh, wonderful. I'm so glad to have us all here together to talk about this topic. But first of all, I'm Jane, I'm from the UK, and I work exclusively with high sensory people, or HSPs, who want to explore their spiritual nature and deepen their connection and alignment. So I specialise in working with high sensory people who, like me, are in 12-step recovery from addiction. But you absolutely don't have to be 12-step to work with me. You just have to want to explore your spiritual connection. You can find me at janeelizabethaston.com and on the High Sensory People podcast that I co-host every week with Alicia May, as well as on the High Sensory Tribe online community. So with the 5 of us here, this is a wonderful opportunity to move on to today's topic. So following on from our discussion last time, I'd like to dive back into some of what we were talking about. And the main theme that came up was how to live from our hearts rather than our heads as high sensory people. And some of the beautiful themes that you all raised last time included this idea of dropping from our heads down into the embodied knowing, which is, you know, rests within our bodies, and tapping into the feeling of expansion rather than contraction within us, really kind of feeling into that and using it as a guide. We also talked about reconnecting with what we sense from above and around us, and trying to embody that and live with that. And we also started talking about some of the techniques that we found useful to help us to live from our hearts rather than our heads, you know, and I just talked about a couple of them there, and I think it would be wonderful to expand on those a little bit so that the people who are watching this maybe get some more sort of tips and tricks and techniques to try out in, you know, in their daily lives, and we can carry on trying them out in our daily lives as well. And I think also a part of this topic is some of the unhelpful habits and some of the blocking behaviors that we've had to unlearn as we've kind of come into alignment, or more into alignment as high sensory people, which has sort of helped us to start to practice this. And along with that, some of the unhelpful and false beliefs that we've had to let go of. And, you know, in my case, that I'm still very much working to let go of on a daily basis. And I think, you know, one of those unhelpful and false beliefs, which I grew up with, you know, my caregivers, they absolutely did the best they could with what they had at the time, but there's a lot of generational trauma sort of hanging over from the Second World War and so on, and, you know, they were not able to give me what they didn't have, and I think all in all they did a really good job. But nonetheless, I sort of grew up with this idea that I probably wasn't good enough, and I had to try really hard at everything to be good enough. And so now, you know, and then being high sensory and not having a place to put that and feeling a little bit different meant that I moved very much away from what was in my heart to my head as I tried to manage these circumstances, how I felt and the way the world around me responded. So this meant I was living very much in my head and not in my heart. And the, you know, the journey from the head to the heart for me has been a very long one. And it continues. It's the longest journey of my life, you know, it's longer than going to a different continent on a plane. This has taken decades. And so much of it really is about coming into an awareness and acceptance that I'm good enough, I'm perfect, I'm perfectly imperfect, as we all are, and I don't actually need to change. I just need to accept and allow and go with the flow and trust my heart, what's in my heart, and tap into those cues, you know, some of those body experiences and intuition, feelings of intuition and knowing that I ignored for such a long time. So I would love to just open up the discussion to all of us now.
I'm happy to. I don't want to speak for very long, but I just want to sort of throw something that I think is really important in relation to heart-centered leadership, and that I think is a capacity to be vulnerable. So a letting go of our guardedness and the things that keep us in fear and out of alignment with our deepest self, our authenticity. Because if you are not able to open your heart, you're not able to connect at the deepest level with other human beings. And I think that's, for me, is at the epicenter of what heart-centered leadership is, that capacity to connect at the deepest level with others.
Oh, I totally agree. I think being able to connect with other people, it really is the most wonderful thing. And for me, I've always been able to do that. I knew that since I was a child. So for me, this problem is all, upside down, because I've always been sort of like doing things from my heart. And it's always felt, I've always known that that was correct. But, it doesn't get up here because I haven't been taught that. Nobody ever told me what I was doing that was correct. I just felt it. I've always felt the connection. And so whenever I don't feel the connection, I feel there's something wrong and I don't know what. And that's taken me quite some time to understand. And, I tried to explain what I do for a living, who I am. And it's so difficult because I feel always somebody's taken my words and misused them. So that whatever I try to say, it's not right, because, what I do comes from my heart, and it always has done. And, I run this centre and I try to explain what it is, but I can't. But people walk in the door and they say, wow, this feels nice. This is something. And they come up with words that I take in, but it means that, things pop into my head and I can't really sort of get my head around it properly. I know words, I know lots of words, but they just don't really fit my heart always, because somebody's used them in other ways. So for me, living from my heart is really, really crucial, and is really, I think, how I knew that I was highly sensitive or high sensory, really from a young age, because I felt that there's something going on here that I understand, but I don't have the words for. So that's my journey. So it's quite special.
Yeah, I really resonate with what Kemal's saying, and Trude, it's lovely to hear your experience as well. And it just sort of reminded me that as I was growing up, I felt very connected to nature and to the animals. That's what I felt, on the one hand. And then with my parents and sort of the people in my life, I didn't feel that connection from the heart, because like Jane was talking about, they're from a certain generation, and they raised me in the way that they thought was the best thing, because that's the way they were told, but it wasn't from the heart, and so there was that discrepancy. Am I able to trust myself, my own experience, and that connection that I feel when I'm outside walking around, playing in nature, with the animals? That felt so real to me, and I felt so connected. But then going into sort of what you could say the real world with people was so different. It was very much about the head. And so there were these two different experiences that I'd be having. And there was that, bouncing back and forth between the two, until I guess the people won for a while. And then, as Jane was saying about this long journey, I've also been on this very long journey and learning to reconnect with myself in the heart. And I can do that easily when I walk out in nature, when I'm with the animals, but I can also do that with people now as well, and embrace that sensitivity and no longer feel shame for having that sensitivity, especially emotional sensitivity, and to really enjoy and embrace it. But it's taken many, many years to get to this point, and I know there's still a long way to go. but it's definitely a worthwhile journey to take. So for anyone who feels any sense of shame or awkwardness about their sensitivity, know that you can change that. You can actually learn how to embrace that. And it's an incredible gift that we have. And I'm really delighted that I have that now. So yeah, a little bit of hope there for anyone who's struggling with their sensitivity.
Yeah, I agree with everything, and resonated with me as well. I think heart-centered leadership is definitely not something that necessarily is supported by society. And, you know, thinking with the up here is definitely something that is rewarded, that is encouraged. And that fight, that struggle between what's being shouted at us and, you know, what that quiet internal higher self voices is trying to whisper to us, as opposed to the shouts from outside. And then, you know, they do butt heads sometimes. And it's not until I think you reach that place, as Kemal said, of you know, really connecting to that pure kind of authentic self, that you can try to, even if it's even the right term to use, but make sense of it, because it will never make sense if you're going to the head to sort it out, because the head's going to just rely on whatever has happened before and use everything that it's heard before and processed before as frames of reference. And of course, that's going to have nothing to do with what is really truthfully our essence. So yeah, for me, it's been a journey of trust, and it's been really learning to connect to that trust of listening to that inner quiet voice, as opposed to, because, and also it's a journey of courage, because it takes an incredible amount of courage to, you know, cut through all of that. Because you're going to actually feel that you're fighting with yourself eternally, because you really, you know, it's sticky. You know, everything in you know, that we've been fed is sticky. It wants to, you know, it wants to stick to us, and it's kind of like, you know, peeling it away, you know, to uncover and unravel, you know, what, you know, truthfully, you know, the truth of who we are, and then actually express that. So you've kind of got to arrive at that place, and then, you know, expressing that is then, you know, the next part of the journey, because quite even more trust is required.
I feel like it's funny, actually, Melina. I was just thinking, oh, I wonder what I'll say next. And then I sort of looked on my notes and I thought, oh, trust. I put something about what Karen said about, you know, not being raised from the heart. I thought, yeah, that's exactly right, isn't it? They did their best. My God, they did their best. You know, those people who brought me up, they loved me and they did their best. But they were too scared, because they'd lived frightening lives when they were children, and their parents were frightened. They were frightened of being judged. They were frightened of being killed. You know, they were frightened of all that stuff. They were frightened of getting it wrong at church that they went to. You know, they were frightened that God would punish them. They frightened people. They made my parents, or my, you know, that generation frightened. So they were frightened. And so they raised me from the head, not the heart, because what they'd learned was, let's think our way out of all of this, and let's do what we've been told. Let's try and follow all the instructions that we've ever been given by all the people around us. And they didn't like give us an instruction book. They just kind of like went, that instruction there, and that one there, and that one there, and that one there, and they created an instruction book for themselves, and then they lived by it, and then they taught me to live by it. And that was, you know, and they did that because they wanted to keep me safe. That's what they wanted. they were still alive, you know, and they wanted to do that for me. Of course they did. But what that meant was that it was far away from my actual experience of being alive in the world. So there was a real dissonance between what I'm being told, what I'm being told to do, how I'm being told to behave, and not just by my immediate caregivers, but by, you know, all the people, all the figures of authority around me. I'm like, well, this actually, my experience, I feel really different from what you're saying I should feel like, or what you're saying is the right thing. Gosh, this is really uncomfortable. Leading me to exactly the piece that you talked about, Karen. Am I able to trust myself and my experience? No, I'm not, because I've only got me telling me that, and I've got everything else around me telling me something really, really different. So it gets very buried by the layers, like you were saying, Melina. And just as I was thinking about trust, you mentioned trust, Melina, and I was like, okay, so that's what I need to talk about next. And then the layers, you know, the layers being peeled off as I, you know, reached, you know, all the points of crises that made me kind of go, this layer doesn't seem to be working, this external layer. So then by whatever process of, you know, like self-development I'm doing, the layer gets peeled off. And in, you know, 12-step recovery circles, we often talk about the layers of the onion. And then sometimes we joke about, how big is this onion? This is the biggest onion in the world. It's got ever such a lot of layers. I can't believe there's still more layers to come off this onion. It's been years. But yeah, there's always more layers. Yeah, but I think that, you know, that even just taking off one or two, I've got closer, and I've done more than that. But even when I had just taken off one or two, I'd already got closer to, you know, living in a more authentic way. And that, you know, the reason for doing it, even though it's tough, is that every bit of authenticity I managed to gain, every bit of living from my head rather than my heart, I'm happier. And I've got more energy, because it's really tiring, isn't it? Living from my head is really tiring and actually frightening. So I'm going to leave it there. Yeah, over to you all.
So the layers thing I wanted to pick up on there, Jane, and, you know, onion is one way of looking at it. I remember being in India and talking to a Hindu monk, and he was explaining to me, and he held up a bunch of coffee coasters in front of a light, and he started taking off their coffee coasters until there was nothing there but the light. And that was quite a sort of profound realization that actually it's these layers that, as we whittle them away, strip them away, what is at the core and what enables us to connect at that deepest level is one person's light with another person's light, which is the authenticity, which is the you know, what is it at my soul level, what is it at you know, the deepest place in me that wants to come out through me. And I think that is about, so when we're aligned with our deepest sense of self, that's our capacity to connect with other people when they're operating from their deepest sense of self. And so the layers of the onion, the coffee coasters, they get stripped away. And that's where I think we have a capacity for a kind of a collective consciousness of wisdom, that when we're just thinking from our head, we're little atoms trying to connect in separate ways with each other, using, and coming back to Trude, what you were saying, you know, words that, you know, is not a very subtle or sophisticated mechanism for communication, words, because they can mean so many different things to so many different people. But feelings and intuitions and sensing into that space in between us as human beings where we can connect, I think that's real intelligence, that's real wisdom, and that's beyond language. And you don't get there through the head. You probably, the heart is absolute, that's where it starts. But it requires an alignment, you know. I mean, coming back to what you were saying, Melina, courage, French for heart, cœur, that's where that idea of, or that sense of, and operating from the heart is a courageous place to operate from. It's not, being vulnerable is a courageous act. It's not a weakness. It shouldn't be seen as something that we should shy away from. I think it is something that being vulnerable with other human beings is what enables us to connect with other human beings.
Can I
Yeah.
speak to that, please? Because that really, really, really resonated. Because courage is really a word that I learnt when I was a teenager. I understood that that was my main asset, because living from my heart was really, really painful, really, really vulnerable. So you've just put all the words on what I felt then. And, always living from your heart in a world that doesn't is like fighting with windmills. And so to me, it's been, I've just been an open heart my entire life. So it sounds so easy, I had a wonderful upbringing, but it's really, really, I mean, it is really, really living a very, very vulnerable life. And once you can admit to being courageous, this is just courage, I'm really, really brave to live like this, then you can manage so many things. So yeah, that's a really lovely word to help you live from your heart, because you are putting yourself out there, you are putting your heart on, on the line, and it may be hurt, but if you dare, you're being courageous, and then you can never lose. Yeah, just really felt like saying that, because it really, really got to me what you said, Kemal. Thanks.
Yeah, that's amazing. I could just see and feel that within you, Trude. It's just the joy of that connection being made just felt really good. Yeah, to observe that. And yeah, I wanted to just say that what I'm finding is that when we connect to our hearts, and when we do that in whichever way feels right for us, and there's obviously multiple ways to do that, you really start knowing who you are. You really start connecting with the essence of you. And that can give you the courage, I think, to then acknowledge the pain and the struggles and the difficulties that you've experienced in your life. Because there's sort of these two parts of you. There's that truth of who you are, and the more and more you connect with that and trust that and spend time with that aspect of yourself, the more compassionate you can be with the part of you that hurts, and then I think you can then connect more easily with other people. First of all, you can make a conscious choice to stay in that heart-centered place within you. And then when the pain gets triggered by another, you can, learn how to reconnect with the heart within you. And then you can try and connect heart to heart with them. And I think this is something that every single one of us can do. However difficult it is, it can be done. And you may need a lot of support in order to do that. But there's so many different ways that you can do that. And it's absolutely worth it, because then you build this beautiful connection with others, and you don't get derailed so often or so quickly or so deeply any longer if you can just keep hold of that connection with your own heart. And I think that when we talk about heart-centered leadership, this is what we so desperately need in the world at any and every and all levels, whether that's in your family, in your community, organizations, on the main political, the political forum of the world. Wouldn't that be amazing?
Yeah, and I think that what helps us to drive us to get there, and also what generates that courage is, in a way, it is the battle that we've been having with our head. So it's very paradoxical, because it's really that battle that we're having with our head that eventually will drive us to the heart. And I think what happens is you get to the point where it's like, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. And you either will just succumb to the head at that point and then go down the path of, the numbing and all of those things, or you get to the point where it's like, I just don't want to do this anymore and I can't. And then you kind of find a way to the heart through there. And in that space, I think that's where the courage generates, because it's ignited, because there is absolutely no other path that you could possibly take, because you know the pain of what happens when you follow the path of the hedge, and you're acutely aware of that. And I think that's where the high sensitivity kicks in too, because it amplifies that pain, and you get to the point where you just, so you are driven to delve into the realm of the heart. And I think when you get there and then you've got that, as Kemal said, it is not quantified. It is a feeling, and it's because it's the feeling that is out there in society. There's no way of of measuring it, or there's all of these things. There's nothing there. There's no tangible element to it. And it's going into that feeling that will help us, I suppose. As we go into it and we feel it, we want to go into it even more and more and more, and it's like a muscle really that we're just developing. But it kind of just you've got to break through that layer first, and then once you get to it, it's more of, I don't really know what this feeling is, but I just don't want to go the other way. Like, I don't want to do the other way anymore. I don't know what I'm getting myself into, but I've got no choice but to get myself into it.
Yeah, isn't that right? I've got no choice. That's how most of us end up on this journey. If we had a choice, I always talk about this, I'd still be sitting on the sofa watching Netflix, eating chocolate. That's what I'd be doing. Whereas, I just want to kind of reiterate really this idea of removing the layers to the light that you talked about, Kemal, because that, it seems to me, is really fundamental piece, enabling the light within me to shine to the light within you. If we remove our layers, those lights will be brighter and they'll just be more light. And that seems profound to me. But I also, think it's really useful for me to talk about, reflect back what you were saying, Melina, about the numbing of emotion when we live from our heads. When I lived from my head in a way that was inauthentic, of course I had to find ways to numb. It was incredibly painful. So the journey from the head to the heart is really going from the numbing of emotion to the embodiment of awareness of what it is actually like for me to be alive. Not what other people tell me what I should be experiencing, but what I actually experience in my day-to-day living. And, becoming aware of that and honoring it, I suppose, really honoring it and appreciating it and feeling grateful for it, and also being vulnerable enough to be real about that with other people. And I think, one of the techniques for me, how to live from my heart rather than my head is actually doing things to get me into my body. It's as simple as that. You know, we did a little exercise at the beginning before we switched it on the record, didn't we, where we just kind of felt our feet on the ground, we focused on our breath, we kind of consciously made the breath bigger. You know, that I find really, really helpful to just drop my attention from what's going on in between my ears to what's going on from the neck down, because that is real, but I get very disconnected from it. So, you know, meditation and also just physical exercise. When I was a child, that's probably when I felt at my most alive, particularly when I was in water. So I was surrounded by this very visceral substance rather than the air that's a bit less, you know, sort of, you can't, you know, you could hold it, but it doesn't have any weight, whereas the water does. So to have that around me made me very conscious of my own body. So for me, it's always about finding ways to get into my body, to drop the awareness down into my body. And I would love to hear, you know, from each of you, what your favorite techniques are to bring you back to the heart when you realize you've gone into your head.
So for me, it won't be a surprise, walking in nature. It works for me, and I'm fortunate to live in Devon, beautiful part of the country, and have a lovely garden, so I can just walk in and just breathe in the air, smell the air. It smells different than it does inside. So that's a really simple way that helps me. And also I've got animals, cats and dogs. Just give them a fuss for a minute, you know, you immediately forget about everything that's in your head and you just focus on them because they're just so present in their bodies. And the other thing that I do is I absolutely love essential oils. And that what is so powerful, just a drop of essential oil, just rub that in between my hands and just breathe it in. You know, you just breathe that in and you just feel it going into your cells, and just it just grounds me within seconds. So that's a really powerful, simple way. And actually I do have a little trio of oils that I use on my heart every morning after my shower: rose, neroli and jasmine. It's just beautiful. So I do a little heart shape around here, and it just feels lovely. It smells lovely, makes me smile, and it just drops me in for a second. But I won't go on. I could go on, but I won't.
For me, I think something that's really important is I've heard it referred to as bending the beam of observation back on yourself. So it's the self-reflective process, rather than being quick to jump to judgment and recrimination and blame and pointing the finger at other people for, and I think that idea of the shadow, and you know, you can't have the light in you if there isn't some kind of shadow there, and understanding what the nature of that shadow is a really important part.
Yeah, it's really profound. And I think on that as well, what you've touched on, Kemal, about, you know, turning the attention inward. For me, when I've lost that connection, I know I've lost that connection when I'm too out there in the external world. It is really a practice of self-love and self-compassion for me, because what I find is when that witness consciousness kind of kicks in and I'm looking up at what is going on, it's invariably that critic, that self-hate bubbling up again. And that is the total enemy of you know, getting into your heart space, because that self-hatred can really blind you. And when you get in the practice of self-love and self-compassion, being kinder and gentler yourself, and then you can starts to pervade, and then you find that you can extend that out into the outer world. But what happens is, if you're not connected to that self-love for yourself, there's just no way that can radiate and be practiced in the outside world or towards the other. So I think also that hatred that we're seeing in the world, and that definitely originates from totally within the self, and it from the self there. So I guess, working with that root, that root of the problem is, for me anyway, I find it always it begins and it ends with self-love.
To me, I am really an extreme extrovert. So for me, it's very often, a bit the other way around. So to me, talking to other people really, really helps. And, being very communicative, very open. I really, really love being in connection with other people. And when they feel that and want to talk to me, that just mirrors back. So being always sort of ready to be of assistance or help, or not, I don't like the word help, but it does help. I mean, being just in connection, it really is healing. So I very often feel that I have that function just by being, just by listening, and that is a massive mirror. So being in connection with other people on a deep level, in deep conversation, feeling into any emotion, being open to the darkness and the light, it really reminds you all the time that, life is all about the balance and the darkness and the light. And you can learn to love the darkness if you know it's going to help you up there. And that, if you work as a coach like we do sometimes, you always get reminded of this because you're in it. So to me, it's it just helps being a coach because you get to be what you need. And that means to be in love. So if you're always in love, in the sense that feeling love to other human beings in the world, it means, there's no war there. I can't feel that I want to be in war with anybody because that's going to ruin my open space that I'm always reminded of. So I think that's my way. That's my routine anyway. Other people and the love that I see in their eyes, and that connection. So when we know the connection, I'm sure that is the answer. That's where you find the answer to all the problems in the world. We just need to listen. That we all need this.
We do, and I think what you were saying there, Trude, really relate to that. Basically, when I'm at peace with myself, I'm at peace with the world. I'm at peace with everybody that I come into contact with. And I notice this in my day-to-day life. If I'm kind of happy with who I am and how I feel that day, or I'm at least accepting how I feel that day, rather than trying to push it away. There's aspects that I don't like. There's bits I'm not at peace with. If I'm in that, people will irritate me. Now, that's just me going about my daily life. But if we transfer that to a bigger scenario, to a world forum, then this is where things can get really, really scary, isn't it? And so, I love what we've talked about today. We talked about, really what living from the heart is at a personal level and, on the world stage. We talked about why it's important. We talked about how, what prompts us to take the first steps of that long journey from head to heart. we've talked about, you know, a little bit about how we've done it, and then we've each talked about the techniques that we've used. So, you know, I talked about kind of physical self, be it getting in my body. Love, Karen, that you talked about, you know, the power, the profound power of nature and animals. I think as high sensory people, we invariably share that to a greater or lesser extent, and I know I absolutely do. And, you know, I love what you said, Trude, about, you know, basically helping other people, being of service, the work that you do, the work that we all do as high sensory people and high sensory coaches. You know, that getting in the 12-step recovery program, we talk about getting out of self, basically stop thinking about myself, start thinking a little bit. Once I've taken care of myself, once I put my own oxygen mask on first on that, you know, like aeroplane, then how can I turn my energy outwards to put it in the world in a useful place that feels valuable? Because, you know, that is also a really good way of me connecting with my heart. And I notice that when I'm, you know, working one-to-one with people or in small groups, I can feel it. The service, the energy that wants to make its way out of me and through to somebody else in a useful way. And then finally, my goodness me, the self-love piece. That is the fundamental building block of world peace, it seems to me. But the shadow self, we've got to, I have had to personally look at that. One of my coping strategies was being nice so that everyone would like me, people pleasing, and pretending I didn't have a shadow side. Of course I do. And we need the darkness to be able to experience the light. We do. It's essential. And not only that, I've needed to acknowledge my shadow side so it doesn't work me from behind in unhelpful ways. And in doing that, when I really do that, and I make friends with it, it's there. It's not terrible. It's just there to be made friends with and actually played with a little bit sometimes. That stops it getting out of hand and becoming dangerous, you know, like a child that's not given enough attention. So I really love what we've talked about today. I think, you know, it's probably time to bring our discussion to a close. Well, thank you all so much for being here today, Karen, Melina, Trude and Kemal. This has been a wonderful discussion. I hope everyone watching has enjoyed it, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.